Thank you for tuning in for part 2 of the 3-part video series for the paper and presentation that was entitled Augmented Reality, ICT and Governing, Imagining a Day When Elections Become Redundant. The presentation continues. We talked about 3D 3C in video 1. The first C was community, and now we're talking about the second C of the 3C, which is creation. When we talk about creating something in a public administration perspective, we're talking about narratives. We talked about in video 1 the battle against the hegemonic narrative, the dominant narrative that marginalizes and oppresses vulnerable populations. And so when we talk about creativity, we're talking about what social entrepreneurs do in order to get their message out, what they're doing to try and change the narratives, what they're doing to try and alter the discourse. So those are words that you'll hear me say frequently in this part of the video. Ideographs are the database units. When you store records in a database, you have to determine what is that record going to look like. And when you want to produce a narrative, when you want to have your outcome, a new governing narrative to help you overcome problems in the world and effect policy change, when you're on a progressive campaign for change, the new narratives are made up of ideographs. Just like a brick wall is made up of bricks, a new governing narrative is made up out of these ideographs. So the MOXIE systems are designed in order to archive and store these ideographs. The idea of where MOXIE came from, Media Omniverse, came from the idea that when I first tried to figure out how to structure the algorithm of this database, how was I going to create narrative threads out of these ideographs, I was trying to deal with the individuals who would be working as social entrepreneurs. As you saw in part 1 of this video, there were 6 genres of artistic creativity that would be led by 6 individuals, each specialists in their own genre of creativity. And there were 6 policy campaigns where they would be led by individuals, social entrepreneurs, who are specialists in their particular campaigns for social justice and social change. And so you have these 12 campaigns coming out of this central figure, which I also talked about in video 1. So if you think of a dodecagon as this center 12-sided object, and then you extend these 12 campaigns from that dodecagon, what happens is then you find and duplicate yourself. So you clone yourself as a social entrepreneur with other individuals who will also have these 12 campaigns extending outward from them. And so from here you have this image of an omniverse, something that's ever expanding and ever growing. So that's what I want you, we talked about that in community, but now from a creative standpoint, this artistic creativity is now being channeled in individual by individuals who are specialists in keeping things going and keeping things growing. And so you have this expanding omniverse. When I first put this down on paper, I got a great big roll of newsprint. I put it across the boardroom table in the PhD reading room at FAU. And I started drawing this diagram, and from there I was able to come up with an algorithm, a web design. And I worked with somebody who had experience in database design, and we came up with this interface, which is very, it's even pre-beta, it's alpha at this point in time. But what you come up with is the idea that you get this drilling down mechanism, and this is what I just want to show to you really quickly, and there's other videos which will explain this in greater detail. So down here in the bottom left corner, if you look at the 6 policy campaigns that I talked about, then you can drill down based on whether you are an activist or a social entrepreneur for women's rights or world peace, or having equal opportunity programs, or if you're a diversity activist, which for all intents and purposes for me, that's been where my experience has been the most in depth, and that is in LGBT campaigns. So I'm a gay activist, so I'm campaigning for diversity. So when we talk about living color campaigns, we're talking about ending racism and oppression based on race and minority status. And living healthy campaigns would be the other campaign. So with these 6 campaigns, in this example here, I'm going to drill down under diversity. So living diverse, in this case here, I chose a sub-thread, a sub-campaign based on faith versus atheism. And then beyond that, I picked a sub-campaign that was based on a one path to God mentality, and there's room for one more drill down layer, which would really allow you to gets very specific. You don't have to go through all of these, and the object is to only drill down as far as you want to in order to pull out the ideographs, which will help you in your narrative thread, whatever your social justice campaign is. Genres drill down the same way. So we've got 6 genres of artistic creativity: listening, performing, reading, seeing, touching, and watching campaigns. So these are one-word ideas that capture a genre of artistic creativity. And then you drill down. In this case, we're going to drill down into blogs, and we're going to narrow the blogs further into activist blogs. And so once again, there's another layer to drill down to. But what we end up with at this point in time is we end up with a narrative thread. In this example, there are 18 ideographs in this narrative thread of activist blogs about one path to God, atheism versus faith mentalities. And so this up here tells you your drill down. If you did a screen capture, you would be able to send this to somebody else and say, this is what I did, this is where my resources came from. From a policy-making perspective, this allows you to pull out this governing narrative as it relates to a very, very specific policy-making objective. So I just wanted to point that out to you. 2 things that are on this graphic as well, which are very important, are these graphics here. One tells us what direction the policy campaign, these are user-generated ratings. So just similar to liking a Facebook post or rating a journalism site as to how this article made you feel. This is the same thing. In this case, in this activist blog, the questions that the users would be asked would be to, okay, where do you rate this on a scale of 0 to 10 on a political scale? So is it leaning to the left? Is it leaning to the right? Is it progressive? Is it conservative? Is it leaning towards socialism? Is it leaning towards capitalism? In this example here, the green needle is showing that it is just below 3. Now I've set the area between 3 and 7 as viable policy proposals. So anything that fits in here fits that middle spectrum. In the United States we talk about governing in the middle. Elections are won in the middle 5% of the electorate. The people that are moderates in the middle determine the election outcomes. The hard left and the hard right people that will always be there, they call them their base. But policy isn't going to pass unless you deal with policies that are in this window here as viable. So this one here is just on the edge of that. So the other rating graphic which we have here, the users would rate as to what direction this particular ideograph is pushing the narrative. Does it push it to the right or does it push it to the left? So what we have in this example here, because this is a red bar, the red bar is the largest, this indicates that it's pushing the narrative to the right. So what we have is something that's at the 3 but striving actively to move to the right, which is perfect. So we would want to push this ideograph into the left-leaning media audience, so that they're, number one, it would be attractive to them, but number 2, it would try and get them to think a little more towards the middle of the road. And that's how we alter the discourse. So this is about discourse structuration, the idea of putting these kinds of measurements, user-generated measurements, embedding them into these ideographs allows us as policymakers to determine where people are and which pieces of this narrative we want to highlight and percolate to the top. Okay, so that's enough about creativity. There's a lot more on other videos and in the handouts, which you can download off of the web page as well. So let's talk about commerce. When you're talking about making a revenue stream or creating a revenue stream, you're talking about the idea of what's your total addressable market. Who are you going to target this to, and is it a viable market? So what we've got here is we've got an online journalism site. So that follows the Huffington Post commercial model. We've also got an idea in here that we're going to get into in the next video about arts incubation centers and putting them in cities across the world. We're also talking about television and radio networks that broadcast from the internet 24/7 from everywhere throughout the world. So these are all addressable markets. These are all markets that we can build upon. We're also talking about e-books and textbooks for social entrepreneurs, stuff that we would use to market out there and sell to these individuals who are striving to be more effective and less dysfunctional, if you remember that word from video 1. And the social justice art is also something that people would buy for their living rooms and buy for the office. Art that doesn't just look pretty, but it's art that is very, that initiates thought and provokes thought And also we're talking about an online university model that would offer probably something with liberal arts degrees once it becomes certified and accredited. The other addressable market, which is quite different but similar, is the idea of this is not something that would appeal to the political right, because the political right, when it comes to media, is already well taken care of. They've, especially in America, there are literally hundreds, if not thousands, of conservative talk radio hosts already out there. So why would you want to put something else into a market that's already saturated and well taken care of? So this is something that would appeal, and by design, appeal to the left, the political left. So these would be individuals who would, in 2011 we saw the EU austerity protests. We would also, as we saw in 2012 in the presidential election, and what governors did in the United States is that they went after unions. Well, unions, talk about dysfunctional hierarchies, unions have outlived their usefulness because of their reliance upon hierarchy. So if unions took their existing leadership and dropped it into a non-hierarchical governing structure that could bring diverse populations together and do it in a way that does not rely upon union dues, then we have this idea, this opportunity to reinvent unions for the 21st century so that they can become more effective. So this would be something that would be very, very useful to labor solidarity movements, Arab Revolution movements. We're going to talk in video 3 about how affordable this becomes once it's maximize the leverage of technology that we have with mobile telephones, where you can buy $15 cell phones. The Middle East peace movement, the idea that we need to alter the discourse within the religions that have been in eternal conflict in the Middle East. And the African pro-democracy movements, where you can also bring the idea of bringing diverse tribes together, people who should be allies in fighting back against the elite that have been oppressing African nations since their dawn of time as well. And so if we could bring these tribal cultures together and have them work together in collaborative efforts and finding consensus building small group mechanisms that are familiar to them with a tribal culture, but eliminate that discord and the backstabbing that is prevalent now in preventing all kinds of progress. So that's the other addressable market that we have. Wherever you create a market, wherever you create an audience, you have created a commodity. And one of the things you learn in Media 101 is that an audience is a commodity. So with this idea of that total addressable market and how enormous it is, you've got these audiences that become a commodity. So there's a revenue stream that would allow this to become self-sufficient. And I talked about the Arts Incubation Center. So what I want to talk about is making this going even further to making this accessible to marginalized populations. And my particular work in South Florida has focused on inner city populations where there is racial segregation still to this day, because the historically segregated neighborhoods are the poorest inner city neighborhoods that we deal with in South Florida as across the South. And what we're also dealing with is poverty. So people who are not mobile, who can't move for better work, they have no means and nothing to fall back on. And they're also sending their children to poor schools and underperforming schools. And they don't have any resources at these schools or in their homes to help them overcome some of the obstacles that we face in getting a higher education, completing your, not only completing high school, but completing a college degree. So what can we put together for these kinds of populations where this a gateway for this kind of technology can be built? Well, what we're working on in Liberty City is we've got somebody already donated this parcel of land. It's a corner parcel of land, and it would become part of this network of a redesigning and reconfiguring of MLK Boulevard in Liberty City. And that we are putting together the plans for a 3 to 5 story building that would become this arts incubation center, where there would be an internet radio studio, a recording studio for doing professional podcasting, for professional videography, and put them up on YouTube Shorts and create trailers for movie ideas, where any kind of artistic creativity that a social entrepreneur can put forward, we would build this incubation center for it so that it would have micro-entrepreneurship, if you will. What we're trying to produce for these individuals is a revenue stream. They would become self-employed entrepreneurs that would translate their artistic creativity and their talent into a revenue stream. So that's what these brick and mortar Moxie facilities are, which are part and parcel of this very important part of this plan that we're putting together. And that's the end of part 2.